I'm going to do a DPS guide for the Survival Hunter here in patch 7.1.5. A couple things I want to bring to light beforehand. First off, there are a lot of people who don't like the spec, and there are a few problems with it and a few holes. However, if you spend the time and work out the kinks, it is a very good spec to play, and you'll have a lot of fun. Another thing I want to point out is my gear at this point is very heavily statted for playing survival. As you'll notice, my item level is 879, 880 right now. I did de-equip my two legendaries that I would be wearing, just because a lot of people that are watching this guide probably won't have the two legendaries that I have. I actually have the two best legendaries for survival. It is the best one is the wrist, which is called the wild, reduces the cooldown on all your aspects by 35%, and the other one is the boots, the Nezingwary's trapping treads, where I get 25 focus every time I use one of my traps. So I did de-equip those. With those equipped, I believe I'm 887 or somewhere around there. So that being said, keep in mind that my procs are probably going to be different than what yours will be, just because I have been very specialized in my stat priority weights in order to more accommodate my play style, as well as where I thought there was holes. And so that's one thing you can do as survival. That's one of the things I think is very good about the spec, is you are able to stat your gear and such in a way to fill where you feel like you have holes based on your play style, where other specs may not be as viable or as easy to do that with. For example, fire mages, you want crit. Doesn't matter how you play, you want crit. So keep that in mind. If you feel like you have holes in certain areas, we'll kind of talk about what you can do stat wise to fill some of the holes, or change your gameplay style to better fit where your gear's at, or change your gear to better fit where your holes are, so that you can maximize the DPS as a survival hunter. So let's just jump into this. First off, I do want to talk about the pet really quick, get this out of the way at first. If you'll notice, oops, that's not what I want to do. If you notice here on my pet, I have it spec'd as Tenacity. Now, those of you who've played Hunter or are pretty familiar with the game, you'll know that Tenacity is the tank spec, as it says right here on the screen. The reason I go with Tenacity is because of the Thunder Stomp. And the reason is, this is an AoE ability. It's really the only AoE ability your pet gets. And we do this because of your passive Mastery Hunting Companion. Your pet's attacks have a chance to give you charges of Mongoose Bite, which, as we get further in this guide, you'll realize is a very important thing, since Mongoose Bite and Mongoose Fury and everything to do with Mongoose is really the pinnacle point of the spec in your gameplay. So having the Thunder Stomp up is really good for AoE, because every single target it hits gives you that chance to give you Mongoose Bite, but it's also an extra ability your pet can do on top of its basic attacks to give you the charge of Mongoose Bite, so you get a couple more charges. The other thing I want to point out about a pet is, if you'll notice, I'm running with a Carrion Bird. This is Body Slasher. This is my pet. It's the rare bird in Tanan Jungle here in Draenor. As you notice, I'm in my garrison. The reason I went with a Carrion Bird, and there's two other pets that have a similar bonus to them, and it's because of this Bloody Screech. Each pet has their own ability they use, and Carrion Birds, theirs is on a 6-second cooldown. It's Bloody Screech. Most pets is a 10-second cooldown. So, try and get a Carrion Bird. If you don't have one, it's not a big deal. There's a couple, like I said, there's a couple other pets. You can go to petopia.com and look that up. But I run with the Carrion Bird because it kind of matches my transmog, and they look cool because they updated the model. So 6 seconds rather than 10 seconds is almost double the amount of charges you can potentially get from Hunting Companion. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at some of our basic abilities. You have here your main ability is Mongoose Bite. It's a 11-second recharge for me. I think baseline is 12 seconds. Each Mongoose Bite starts up Mongoose Fury, which lasts for 14 seconds. And each Mongoose Bite increases damage of the next one by 50%. And it'll stack up to 6 times in that 14-second window. So if you have 6 stacks, 300% increased damage, which if you're already doing 190,000 physical damage, you're getting close to 600,000. It's a fair amount of DPS. So basically the idea is you stack Mongoose Bite up to 6 within that 14 seconds, and then you use your artifact ability when it's on off cooldown, and the artifact ability is Fury of the Eagle. Does damage in a cone in front of you, and it's increased by Mongoose Fury. It's really good for AoE. If you can build up your Mongoose Bites, then use this on AoE. Does a lot of damage. It also does a fair amount of damage on single target. One thing to keep in mind is you need to separate yourself with Fury of the Eagle from the idea that you have to use it on cooldown. It's a great ability, you can always see artifact ability, and you want to use it because it's cool, it's your artifact. The problem is if you don't have 5 or 6 stacks of Mongoose Fury, you're really not getting the damage out of it, and you're losing DPS by using it because it's a 3.7 second cooldown. So that being said, you're going to want to apply your Mongoose Bite, charges get to 6. If you're not quite at 6 or at least 5, you probably don't want to use Fury of the Eagle. It's well worth to wait another 14 seconds to get your charges up to 6 if you're not quite getting there. If you're not quite getting there consistently, you may want to look at increasing some of your stats, particularly Mastery, to try and increase the charges you get, but we'll talk about that later. The other main abilities you have, Flanking Strike. Basically kill command, you do an attack with your pet. This is kind of works if you're doing soloing content as misdirection as well, because if the target you're attacking is on you, your pet does 400% increased threat. So kind of time this well with when you want to use it as a taunt or with your taunt to hopefully get aggro off yourself to your pet. To the other two abilities, I want to bring up Raptor Strike. It's your single target damage dealer / focus stump. It's baseline, you want to use it when you want to empty focus, but there's a couple of talents that prioritize this a little more, so we'll get to those. The other one is Carve. This is basically your AoE that will replace Raptor Strike. You want to use Carve when you have at least 2, preferably 3 targets, just because it does cause a fair amount more focus than Raptor Strike. But once you have a couple targets, the damage is greater. And the last one I'll bring up is Lacerate. It's a dot you put on the target over 12 seconds, costs 35 focus, doesn't have a cooldown, does a fair amount of damage. Want to try and keep this up on the target as much as possible. You can pick a talent that will give this a chance to give you Mongoose Bite charges, but it's only a 2% chance, so we'll talk about that when we get to the talents here in a second. You have your Interrupt, Muzzle, and then you also have your traps. There they are. You have your traps here. You got Freezing Trap, 24-second cooldown, incapacitates the target for 1 minute. You got Explosive Trap that does damage and burns all enemies for 10 seconds after that. And then you have, I have Caltrops right now. Baseline is Tar Trap. I'll just go ahead and take that off so we can look at that. Baseline is Tar Trap here. It's basically a slow. This slows enemies for 50% and lasts for a minute like all your other traps. And the last one here is Aspect of the Eagle. Right now, mine's on a 1.04 minute cooldown because I have my bracers equipped. I'm going to go ahead and take those off here in a second. But your pet does 20% increase critical strike chance on all abilities. Your pet's attacks have an additional 25% chance to grant you charge the Mongoose Bite, lasts for 10 seconds. The other thing it does, if you look here on your artifact tree, if you have this golden trait, it increases the damage you deal by 30% for its duration. While we're here, let's go ahead and look at this golden talent up here in the top left. It's Harpoon applies on the trail, which is basically just a dot for 12 seconds, and your melee auto attacks extend its duration for 6. I've been able to get this up to close to a minute, which is fairly good. You know, if you're on a boss that has a lot of mobility and you can't always stay right on it, you know, as you're moving around, really nice to get it high because you don't have to worry about, oh, I gotta hurry and get there to hit this, or I have to harpoon to reapply it. One thing to keep in mind is if you harpoon to another target, this drops off the target you had it on and reapplies to the new target. Unfortunately, you can't put it on 1,000 targets. It only stays on one. Alright, so with that being said, let's go ahead and, before I forget, I'm going to swap off my legendaries here. Oops. And then we'll go ahead and look at talents real quick. Alright, so one thing I want everyone to keep in mind when they're looking at talents. They've done a really good job this expansion, particularly in this patch, at evening out talents, so there's no longer so much of an emphasis on you have to pick these talents in order to maximize your DPS. There's a little more wiggle room. You can have a little more room to play with how you feel comfortable, what you think is best for you, and how you want to play. So, for example, let's just look at this row 60 here. This is kind of your trap talent row. So, you know, you've got Caltrops here that does a bleed, and it ticks for 25,000 every second, over 15 seconds. It's on a 12-second cooldown. This is the one I'm currently running with. It seems to do the most damage, and I'm the most comfortable with it currently. Before this patch, I was running Still Trap, which we'll get to in a second. But the cool thing about Caltrops is it lasts for 15 seconds, and as long as the target stays there, it refreshes every second that the 15 seconds is down. So if it's there at the last second, it'll reapply, and so you basically have 30 seconds of this dot on the target. So even though it's on a 12-second cooldown, you have 16, 17 more seconds to throw it on the ground before you're losing the damage from it. Makes it nice if you have other things you need to do, like Mongoose Bite or Fear the Eagle or whatever. Not as big of a hurry about getting it down super fast. Now, obviously, you want to try and keep it up on cooldown if possible, because you don't have less to worry about if it's going to drop off. But it's not one of those things where you have to use it as soon as the cooldown comes off. We'll go ahead and look here at Still Trap, which replaces Freezing Trap. It does a burst damage, or does a bleed over 30 seconds. And with calculating, Caltrops does more damage right now. But if you can mix Still Trap with a DPS increase, such as your Fear of the Eagle, or some other type of damage increase, it potentially can be more damage. So something you want to play with. I need to do a little more testing myself to see if I want to go back to this now that I have the call of the now that I have the bracers, the legendary bracers. Now that my cooldown from that makes my Aspect of the Eagle 1 minute, I can basically line up every Still Trap with that. Just wait 12 seconds and increase it by 30%. Something I want to play with and see if it actually does put out more damage than Caltrops. This middle one, Guerilla Tactics, I feel like is more of a PvP one, but you're welcome to try it out and see if it does more damage for you. It does increase explosive traps damage by 50%. So rather than doing the baseline of 250,000 and then another 250,000 over 10 seconds, it ends up being about 375,000 and then another 375,000. So it ends up being a little bit more than Steel Trap's baseline if you go with this one. So once again, look at your playstyle, see what you prefer. I mean, explosive trap's already part of your rotation, so if it's one less thing you have to worry about, because survival is a very busy spec, if it makes it easier for you, go ahead and go that route. Like I said, it's really up to what your playstyle is. So now that we've talked about that a little bit, let's go ahead and go down each row, talk about the different talents. So your top row, you have Animal Instincts, which your flanking strike reduces the cooldown of one of 4 different abilities by 2.8 seconds, and it's a random chance whatever one it picks. I'm not particularly keen to go with this talent. I don't really like it. I feel like there's too much RNG based in this to make it worthwhile. Survival already has a fair amount of procs, and so it's something that I feel like adds one more uncertainty to the rotation. But you're welcome to give it a try. The problem I see is it reduces the cooldown on 3 damage increasers and 1 utility, and so to me it doesn't really seem like it's a solid let's go with this, because it's going to increase my DPS, where the other 2 in this row definitely increase my DPS. So the second one is Throwing Axes. Does a fair amount of damage, and it's a 14-second recharge. This is good if you're going to be moving a lot and have to ranged. I go with this one for PvP, and I used it up until 7.1.5 because it was stronger than the third talent on this row, but they have since buffed Way of the Machnathal, which we'll get to in a second. But if you're doing a boss fight where you're moving around a lot, have a couple pockets of where you're in ranged locations and can't really hit the boss, this is nice to have as a damage dealer. So you can look at the fight, or you kind of go with your play style once again. The third one, this is kind of my suggestion, is Way of the Machnathal. It's one more thing you have to manage on top of Mongoose Fury. Increase your attack power by 3% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. So if you're able to keep it at 4 stacks, you get a 12% damage increase over 10 seconds. 10 seconds is plenty of time, in my opinion, to refresh it. It used to be on 8 seconds, I believe, or 6, and it was just not enough time to keep it up. I felt like too much focus was being put on it, and it wasn't enough time to stay on top of it with all the other things you're doing as survival, because it is a really busy spec. I suggest you go with this one, particularly if you want to make this spec kind of an endgame spec, or if you want to get into raiding or something. The sooner you can get a handle on feeling comfortable with this one, the sooner your damage will increase. But if you're not comfortable with managing this as well as Mongoose Fury and your other cooldowns and keeping your traps up and all the other things the spec has, give it a try at least. But your Throwing Axes is pretty close to the same, but this ends up being a higher DPS increase the longer the fight goes. The second row, we have Murder the Crows, which is a pretty basic talent now for hunters. I believe all hunters are going Murder the Crows at this point. And 1 minute cooldown, the target dies in the first 15 seconds, then it's reset. Really nice if you got lots of AoE small mobs, you're going to burst down really quick. You can get a lot of resets on this. Doesn't unfortunately tell us how much damage it does, but I've done some testing and I believe it's pretty close to the same damage that both BM and Marksman have on this. It also, if you mix this with your Fury of the Eagle, because Fury of the Eagle does increase damage done by your pet, it technically counts crows as a pet, and so there is a little bit of a damage increase on top of the 30% increase, which is nice. Your second row, I did hint to this, or second talent in this row, I did hint to this earlier, is Lacerate gives you a 2% chance to gain a charge of Mongoose Bite. Now this is every time you apply it, as well as every second it ticks. Remember, it's a 12-second dot, so every second you get a 2% chance to gain a Mongoose Bite. This is what I ran with pre 7.1, but in 7.1 they buffed Murder the Crows to the point that it was better. But if you feel like you're low on Mongoose Bites, you're never getting any reset of Murder the Crows, go ahead and give this a shot. It may fill that hole for you. Or you can go with this third talent here, Snake Hunter. You instantly get 3 charges of Mongoose Bite every 2 minutes. The problem I have with this talent is that your Fury of the Eagle is a 45-second cooldown. So you only can use this on every third Fury of the Eagle, basically. And with the buff that they put in 7.1 to Hunting Companion, this is not nearly needed as much. So I would suggest Murder the Crows, but if you're feeling like you would benefit more from these, there are a fair amount of the community that's going with each one of these talents at different times. Your third row is really your movement increase row. You have Post Haste, which when you harpoon, it frees you from any roots or movement impairing effects, and then you get a speed buff for 5 seconds. I use this anytime we're doing dragons and Emerald Nightmare. It was really nice if I got rooted, got the target of that root, to just be able to harpoon to one of the dragons and break free. The one I'm currently using though is Disengage. They just added this in here in 7.1.5. I feel like it's a very pivotal ability for hunters, and I was really sad they didn't have it as survival, so I'm glad to have it back. It makes it really nice if you have a target that you need to hurry and get away from to harpoon back into, and reapply your on the trail dot from harpoon. So that's kind of what I run with the exception of I go to Post Haste for dragons, or when I'm doing Karazhan, I always go Trailblazer. It's a passive movement speed increase by 30% when you have it attached for 3 seconds. And with Karazhan, you can't mount up, you have to run everywhere. It's so much nicer to have this movement speed increase. But baseline, I go with Disengage. That's kind of my default, and I go with the others based on the content I'm doing. We talked about the trap row, so let's go ahead and go to your level 75 talents. This is kind of your utility increase row. You've got Sticky Bomb, which is a knockback. I'm not real keen on this one. I hate knockbacks. Tanks hate knockbacks. Raiders and the rest of your party hate knockbacks. You only really want to go with this one if you have to go with this one. So try and avoid knockbacks, in my personal opinion, but if your group calls for a knockback, or if you see a need for a knockback while doing world content, go ahead and go with it. I like Ranger's Net. It's a 3-second root on a 1-second cooldown, and then in addition to that, their movement speed is reduced by 50%. Survival can just reduce movement speed like crazy, and this is what I go with baseline. It's really good for PvP, especially against demon hunters, because they keep breaking out of it, but every second you can root them back in place and they can't get away from you. The other one is Camouflage. A couple times nice to use this. If you're doing a Mythic Plus, you want to stealth past a group of people, is nice. But it's one of those that's really play with how it is, situational things. But like I said, I go Ranger's Net most of the time. Level 90 is another one of those rows that really depends on how you want to play. You've got Butchery that replaces your Carve. Does a fair amount more damage than Carve does. You've got 2 charges on an 11-second recharge. This really isn't as strong as the other two, unless you've got a lot of burst AoE you've got to do. So if you've got AoE but the targets are going to die relatively fast, like in 2 or 3 seconds, this is what you're going to want to go with, just because the damage output for that amount of time is greater. You've got Dragon's Fire Grenade. It's 30-second cooldown. Does a fair amount of damage over 8 seconds, 460,000. Another movement speed decrease. And then it does burn targets next to it. The disadvantage of this one is if you're trying to use it for AoE, if the target you happen to hit isn't near anything else, it doesn't burn the other targets. Whereas you have Serpent Sting here, which is the one I go with for a couple reasons. First off, whenever you use Raptor Strike and Carve, it applies the dot for 15 seconds. So AoE, single target, you're always going to be able to put out this dot. And as long as the target lasts for that 15 seconds, the damage output is greater than the other two. If you've got a single target, a lot of single targets are going to die within 8 seconds. Dragon's Fire Grenade is higher. If you've got lots of AoE targets that are going to die within 4 seconds, you want to go Butchery, like I mentioned earlier. It's going to last for 15 seconds, so Serpent Sting's the one to go. But on top of that, if you're going Way of the Mok'Nathal, that talent from our top row, you don't even have to manage this because you're keeping the Mok'Nathal buff up every 10 seconds, which automatically refreshes this within the time frame. So you don't even have to worry about trying to keep this up because you're already managing it by keeping up your attack power buff, which only lasts for 10 seconds. Your last row is another one that is a good place to see where you have holes and fill what you need to do. You've got Spitting Cobra, 1 minute cooldown, lasts for 30 seconds, does a fair amount of damage, but the biggest thing it does for you is it gives you extra focus. Now if you're one of those players that doesn't have necessarily the best stats on your gear, or you feel like you're always running out of focus in pockets because survival is very heavy on using nothing that costs focus, and then we're going to use a bunch of stuff that costs focus, and then we're out of focus and have nothing to do. This is something you may want to look into. Its damage output has been increased to the point that it is viable and pretty close to the other talents in this row. But it's something that I don't go with because, first off, I have the legendary boost to give me focus. But even before then, I felt like if you manage your focus correctly and spread out your focus using abilities with your non-focus using abilities, you can manage your focus pretty well. The second talent in this row is Expert Trapper. It really increases the specialization of traps for survival because we are the masters of traps. So Freezing Trap, when it drops off, does another movement speed decrease. An Explosive Trap does 75% increased damage on the target it triggers on. Tar Trap has a chance to root enemies in place. Steel Trap does an immediate burst of 200,000, so if you mix that with Fury the Eagle, like I mentioned earlier, that's an extra 30% on top of that. Ends up being 260,000, close to that, give or take. And then Caltrops, increase Caltrops damage by 50%. So this ends up being a higher damage output, in my opinion, than Spitting Cobra. But if Spitting Cobra solving your focus starve problems, then you're ultimately getting more damage out that way because you can use more abilities. Aspect of the Beast, I'm not real keen on, but we'll go over it anyway. For us, it adds something to flanking strike based on your pet specialization. So you either apply a bleed if you're in ferocity, if you're tenacity, which if you remember from the beginning of the video, that's what I go with because of the thunder stomp. So your pet takes 30% reduced damage, or if you're cunning, which is what I actually do switch to for PvP, then it's another slow to your target. So this one, I would never go with this one under the current setup just because I do go tenacity, and so it's no damage increase. It's just a damage reduction to my pet. So I lose out on the damage increase from this row from the other two talents. But if you're going to go Ferocity, it is a fairly significant bleed that probably is equal to or greater than the damage output of the other two talents. And so you're welcome to experiment with this one if it's something you feel like suits your playstyle. So now that we've kind of talked about these talents, we're going to go ahead and attack this target dummy. One thing I do want to bring up is here in my macros, I've created one for my Harpoon. You see here, I've macroed Harpoon with Dash and Charge, which are the two movement abilities for your pet specs. And the reason I've done this is a lot of people complain that, okay, I harpooned my target, but my pet takes forever to get there, and so I can't use Flanking Strike, or my pet doesn't do any damage for a few seconds. So with macroing this in, now obviously, Charge, which is what Tenacity has, is a 25-second cooldown, so Harpoon is shorter cooldown than that, so if you're jumping around a lot, your pet's not always going to be able to keep up with you, but it at least helps solve the initial movement and helps mitigate a little of the lag with your pet, which is an issue. So I recommend doing this macro. You're welcome to copy what I have here and go from there. So let's go ahead and let's jump in here. So I'm going to Harpoon. As you see, my pet right behind me. I've got now, I'm going to hurry and spam up my charges of Knock Mythal up to 4. So I've got 4, so my attack power is increased. And I use Fury of the Eagle, make sure I refresh Knock Mythal in time. Get my trap up. Explosive Trap, Caltrops, Knock Mythal refresh. Keeping those Mongoose Bite and Mongoose Fury up, as you can see here. It's at 8 now, and I've got 2 charges on there. I definitely can feel the lack of focus on regeneration from my traps. Gonna have to do a little more management here. One thing I want to make sure you all understand is when you use Fury of the Eagle, it increases the duration of Mongoose Fury by 4 seconds. This allows you to use Fury of the Eagle and then hit one more Mongoose Bite charge at the end of it. So here I'm going to kind of let my charges build up so I get 3 and have full focus so I can show you what I'm talking about so you can see the benefits of it. Alright, so I've got 3, so I'm going to go apply all 3. 2, 3. Now I'm going to hit Fury of the Eagle, which will give me hopefully enough charges to get back up to 6. 5, not quite. So I'm going to use Fury of the Eagle, I go back up to 6 seconds, it comes off. I can use a couple more stacks of Mongoose Bite and increase my damage input there. Now, if you remember, I mentioned earlier, if you've got 6 stacks of Mongoose Fury up, that's 300% increased damage. So even though it doesn't increase past 6, each one of your charges of Mongoose Bite you use does 300% increased damage. So if you've got 3 stacks when you come out of Fury of the Eagle, go ahead and use 1 or 2 or however many to let you use to increase your damage input, because that's going to be more than keeping up your Mongoose Fury right out of Fury of the Eagle. Now obviously you want to do your best to keep up Mongoose Fury at all times because that's going to increase your DPS, but also play it by ear on what situation you're in and how many stacks you've got. So I'm going to go ahead and drop out of combat here. Dismiss my pet. And all my dots drop off. You notice my on the trail was up to over 30 seconds there, which is a fair amount. So I'm going to hurry and pull up my stats real quick. I'm going to swap back. Oh, I did have my legendary. Yep, my legendaries are on. So swapped into my legendaries so you can kind of see where my stats are with my legendaries. You know, I've got 7% mastery, 9%, almost 9% haste. Crit's a little high now with 7.1.5. Your stat produce changed a little bit. It was crit verse. Now haste is more important for survival than it was before, and so my crit is a little high. I'm pretty comfortable with where my stats are. I feel like I'm able to equalize my damage output, and you know, if you were looking at my damage meter, you see I was pulling over 400k consistently, and that's without a flask, without food, without pre-pots, or any type of damage increase. So, and I don't think I had my legendaries on either, so that's another thing that you can look at. But one thing I do want to try and get my gear a little more towards with going into Nighthold is I'd like my haste to probably be closer to 10 to 12%, because that will decrease my global cooldown to 0.75 seconds, which will allow me to hopefully get in a little more damage output. There's not much I would want to change besides that. My mastery, I'm pretty comfortable with where it was. If you were paying attention to my Mongoose Fury, I was getting at least 5 stacks every time, if not 6. And your Versatility, I think, is still one of your best stats for survival, just because it seems to survival seems to benefit more from a higher versatility number than a lot of other specs do. So, you know, prioritize haste, but don't go above 15%, just because 15% is the cap at the gain you will get out of it. But once again, kind of go with how you feel like your gameplay goes. If you feel like you're running out of abilities to use, or you're running out of focus, your haste may be low. If you're never getting 6 charges of Mongoose Fury, your mastery is probably low. If you feel like you always have abilities to use and you're doing way too much and you're always topped on focus, maybe your haste is too high. You want to bring it down a little bit and increase your versatility to get a bigger damage output. All those things are things to consider with your stats. You know, there's cookie cutter stat weights on Icy Veins or Ask Mr. Robot, but really stats should also reflect how you play individually, because we're all individuals and we all play differently and we all have different strengths and things we like to prioritize. So keep that in mind. But other than that, that's about all we have for you today. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the comments. If you like this video, shoot me a like, sign up for my page. We're hopefully going to be putting out guides for other classes and specs here in the future. And if you like my UI, want to know how I set it up and why I set it up, and then go ahead and put that in the comments as well, so I can see what the interest is out there to see if it's worth me doing a video. So I hope you enjoyed what you saw, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thanks so much.